Welcome to part 11 of the Bread Circus's Phantom Menace retrospective. In the last part, we followed the infiltration of Theed Palace. We've avoided the Sith apprentice twice already. In this video, it's time to examine the most influential lightsaber duel of recent decades.
Wobbling delegate.
I miss.
If you've seen a few of our videos and feel like we've earned your support, please take time to check that you're still subscribed to the channel. Leave a like perhaps. Fiddle with the notification bell so you're notified as soon as we upload new videos. Why not join us on Discord? We promise it's only half as bad as that sounds.
Hudson, just deal with it because we need you and I'm sick of your bullshit.
If you'd like to support us financially, consider becoming a patron or clicking join under this video. YouTube members get access to Imperial rank insignia in the comments section.
I have another task for you. Whatever my master wishes shall be done.
Complications and setbacks were to be expected and would be dealt with. All that mattered was the grand design, and it was proceeding apace. Soon the Jedi would be put to the slaughter.
At last we will have revenge.
The Jedi, how he hated them, how he loathed their hollow sanctimoniousness, their pretense of piety, their hypocrisy. How he longed for the day when their temple would be a ruin of smoking rubble littered with their crushed corpses. If he closed his eyes, he could see the apocalypse of the Order as vividly as if it were reality. It was reality after all, a future reality, but nonetheless valid. It was destined, ordained, predetermined, and he would be instrumental in bringing it about. It was what his entire life had been designed for. Despite his near-perfect control of his nervous system, Maul felt his pulse quicken slightly in anticipation. If all went as planned, soon this onerous chore would be over. A mistake against one would be fatal. Darth Maul did not make mistakes.
Last time we saw Darth Maul, it was after leaving him behind on Tatooine. This represents a moderate setback to the Sith agenda. Originally, their plan had been to recapture the Queen immediately. Maul located them too late, then failed to finish his first duel. That first engagement caused no damage or injury whatsoever. One pro-droid was lost before the fighting began, and they're disposable.
What was it?
Droid of some kind. I didn't hit it that hard. Must have had a self-destruct.
An Imperial probe droid.
That leaves Maul with his speeder bike and Sith infiltrator ship. He returns to Coruscant at the same time as the Queen. His cover has already been blown. It's wise to go into hiding for a moment. The Jedi actually predict the next move, that Maul will resurface on Naboo.
Queen Amidala is returning home, which will put pressure on the Federation and could widen the confrontation.
And draw out the Queen's attacker.
As far as we can tell, the Sith leaves Coruscant later than the Queen. Both ships arrive the same day, though it seems the Queen gets there first.
I'm sending my apprentice, Darth Maul, to join you.
That implies the ships have relatively similar hyperdrive speeds, as we expected them to. Earlier, we proposed that the Scimitar has a Class 1.5 hyperdrive, significantly faster than the Class 3 it lists in original reference books. That makes it a little swifter than the Naboo Royal Starship at Class 1.8.
We've sent out patrols. We already located the starship in the swamp.
By the time the Queen's ship was located, the apprentice was already in the throne room. He needs a fast ship. Maul keeps responding to the movements of other characters.
Lord Maul, be mindful. Let them make the first move.
Next morning, the baddies have detected the Gungan Grand Army. Given the lack of humans involved, everyone sees through the ruse.
We are sending all troops to meet this army assembling near the swamp.
This will work to our advantage.
This is not the true extent of the plan. Jedi would make no difference on the battlefield. Even a dozen knights couldn't win such a war.
There are too few of us, Your Highness. We have no army. And I can only protect you. I can't fight a war for you.
A Dark Lord of the Sith would be equally wasted on the Great Plains. He's waiting for the inevitable next move. Right now, everyone knows the Jedi and Queen are still planning something. Waiting in the palace was the correct decision. The Queen tips her hand at noon, just as the battle begins.
I thought the battle was going to take place far from here. This is too close.
Darth Maul hears that a group of humans have attacked Theed Hangar, very close by. This is clearly the real threat. Both Sith will have foreseen something along these lines. In fact, even the Nemoidians may have seen this coming. Maul springs into action, immediately setting off toward the hangar. It takes the Queen a few minutes to clear the hangar, so there is time for him to have walked. Perhaps more likely, he kept his speeder bike stashed nearby and rode that. The next few moments are some of the most memorable in the entire movie. It's clear a good fraction of the effect comes from the soundtrack. Other signals include the way characters react and the environment. Notice the size and thickness of the door. It's not obvious what would normally pass through this door. It seems clear it was sized for Darth Maul's presence rather than his height. On the Death Star, blast doors are slightly too short for a Wookiee. The Naboo doors are twice as tall as any of the humans who built them. As for the character reactions, a 20-man infiltration team stops in its tracks.
We'll handle this.
We'll take the long way.
It's likely these soldiers have spent days discussing the Queen's attacker. They will be eager to leave and find more appropriate targets. Meanwhile, the Force users remove their traveling cloaks. This marks the first time we see Maul's horns clearly, though they weren't a secret. His horns are visible as soon as he lands on Tatooine. Next, it's time for the most influential 5 seconds of the movie. It would be no exaggeration to say this has reshaped the Star Wars universe. Darth Maul holds his long-handled lightsaber horizontal. He activates the saber blade, and then he does it again. This isn't the first double-bladed lightsaber in the history of Star Wars. For one thing, Exar Kun was famous for having a blue-bladed one. Darth Maul didn't invent the double-bladed lightsaber, he made it popular. From this point on, the saber staff has been a staple of Star Wars. A game will likely give you 3 options: 1 lightsaber, 2 sabers, or a double-bladed saber. If you were to ask someone to describe their ideal lightsaber, I'd expect there's an even spread between all 3. The Jedi also draw their sabers, ending in different stances again. Obi-Wan has the blade directly in front of him, held high and vertical. This is a heroic pose, and I'm quite sure young Kenobi has perfectly executed a move from his training. Qui-Gon has chosen something asymmetrical. His blade is askew, extended somewhat in front of him. The elbows are bent, the sword is carried closer to the chest. A deliberate stance, showing Master Jin as experienced and independent. This fight is his mission. He will have considered an opening move. Darth Maul begins whirling the double saber. He's going to do this a lot, so we'll discuss it when we have a wider angle. Kenobi has a plan of his own. the same flip Maul had used. Our dichotomy opens the combat, you might say.
This is where the fun begins.
Let them pass between us.
This is a very sensible thing to have done. Jedi outnumber Sith 2-1, a massive advantage. The ideal way to exploit that is multiple simultaneous strikes from different angles. In this case, Maul parries with the back blade while facing forward. Very cool, just don't try it unless you're force sensitive. Obi-Wan wouldn't have hit Maul with that swing, but he wasn't trying to. By controlling one end of the saber, Kenobi can dictate where the other end goes. When we see what Qui-Gon has been doing, he's already in the middle of an attack. A horizontal swing to follow up on the opportunity. Maul ducks underneath this one, which is great. Trying to parry or block usually ends up as more risky than to dodge or evade. Qui-Gon manages to turn his missed swing into a downward swipe. Young Kenobi tries the same thing, but doesn't even connect with the saber blade. Maul has brought his saber around to the far side of each opponent. That's actually a great idea. Very clever use of the tools available. In the earlier stance, he had threatened the right side of both Jedi. After a quick spin, he's already on their lefts. Qui-Gon responds immediately, swinging his saber around to the far side. Our Jedi apprentice then takes the opportunity to go into a spin. This really is a safe opening to do it. Maul is distracted. If you were looking to criticize this fight scene, spinning may be your best bet. Surely it can't be to gain momentum. Lightsabers are practically weightless. Let's take the complaints about spinning as implied from this point on. Qui-Gon has his sword raised again, touching both of Maul's blades in a split second. By this point, Kenobi has come out of the spin into a horizontal swing. This also seems to be a distraction, setting his master up for a new attack. Qui-Gon comes in with a low attack to Maul's legs. A moment like this could have ended the duel, if it hadn't been blocked. In a move we haven't seen yet, Maul has his saber held vertically. He blocks a swing from each Jedi using the lower blade, moving the staff without rotating it. We then cut to a much wider angle. Darth Maul has been swinging both ends of his saber staff to attack Qui-Gon in turn. Before he can continue the combo, Obi-Wan interrupts the pattern. That allows Qui-Gon a chance to attack again, which forces Maul's saber back to vertical. Both Jedi take turns to hit opposite ends of Maul's saber, locking it in place. They have him on the defensive, repeatedly blocking. This makes sense for our Jedi friends, even if the execution is somewhat flawed. They are approaching from different angles, trying to overwhelm a single opponent by weight of numbers. That's when Maul changes the game. While he blocks the next attack from Kenobi, he kicks Qui-Gon. This actually qualifies as the most effective move of the entire fight, because it lands without having been blocked. Master Jin completely loses his footing, falling to the ground on his back. Obi-Wan attempts to follow this up with another attack, but misses because Maul is in motion. The Sith apprentice just had an uncomfortably close call. The kick was intended to create space. Darth Maul spins and flips his way across the hangar floor. This isn't the fastest way to cover ground, but it looks better than bravely running away. It also serves to keep Maul in combat, drawing the enemy toward him. He doesn't intend to disengage from the fight, only to change the terrain. The Jedi are getting far too comfortable on such level footing. As Maul approaches the wall, he telekinetically grabs a bit of debris. I had once thought it was a pointless gesture, but this works on multiple levels. First of all, the obvious reference is to Maul's eventual replacement. Starting in Episode 5, we see Darth Vader throwing objects at Luke. That's an interesting ability to have, and I'm sure the similarity was intended. The implication here is evidence for something I've believed for many years. The Force is not like a magic hand. It has limited dexterity and precision. It's easier to lift a stone than an equal weight of gravel. The reason I think this is from the carbonite freezing control panel. I have the impression that these are not the original controls. A lever was rigged up as part of Vader's trap.
All too easy.
On any normal day, the control panel would have looked different. This large lever only exists so that Vader has an easier time grabbing it. He probably could press a tiny button, but it would take more time or effort. That would explain Maul's actions here. He grabs something to throw at the door controls. If there were no constraints, surely he could have pressed the door open button. The only advantage of destroying the door control is so the Jedi can't interact with it. With the Jedi Master still regaining his footing, Maul is fairly safe. There's only a Padawan learner approaching right now. Kenobi had been twirling his saber in one hand, an unnecessary flourish. Darth Maul responds with a more impressive two-handed twirl. We should keep in mind that this isn't an attack, it's more of an intimidation move. Maul doesn't believe he can finish Obi-Wan in this moment. The Sith helicopter twirl helps to keep the apprentices spaced out. It also emphasizes a key advantage. Jedi don't plan to fight against this weapon. Young Kenobi can't fall back on his training as he could with a standard opponent. One key advantage is that Maul can be unpredictable. It's not clear which blade he'll use next, or when. Obi-Wan swings down into the windmill, connecting with one of the blades. We see another moment that could have ended the duel. The Jedi does a spin. This time there was no good opportunity. The timing was very tight. If Maul had reacted a little faster, that mistake could have been fatal. Maul is forced to block, though he retains the spinning motion. By this point, Qui-Gon is back on his feet and has caught up to the apprentices. When rejoining the fight, Master Jin has his timing offset. He attacks while Obi-Wan winds up for a swing of his own. There is no chance of winning the fight in this second, everyone accepts that. Both sides are trying to prolong the encounter for a later victory. The two Jedi attack from up high, trying to tie up Maul's saber. With the Sith blade forced into a high guard, Qui-Gon is free to attack the legs. This would have been a great bit of teamwork against any other weapon. A double-bladed lightsaber is perfectly suited to defeat such tactics. Immediately afterwards, we get another set of uncommon moves. Both Jedi go into a spin here, though with different timing. Obi-Wan goes first, and gets a boot to the head. Darth Maul is using kicks again. That's relatively strange for a lightsaber duel. It makes Maul seem practical, aggressive, perhaps even unsporting.
Use your aggressive feelings, boy.
As before, the mighty boot is the most effective attack so far. Kenobi is knocked off his feet, taking him out of the fight for several seconds. Qui-Gon has his back turned while this happens. The spin of Jin will finish just as the opportunity is gone. Before Qui-Gon can strike, Darth Maul is halfway through a leap. His motive is exactly the same as before, trying to get a terrain advantage. Create an opening to move, then run a short distance. Last time Maul used a kick, he reached the door and opened it. Besides that, nothing has changed. The ground is still flat. There are walls slightly closer, but this hasn't affected combat so far. The Sith apprentice lands on the far side of the door. Qui-Gon follows him in, keeping the pressure on until Kenobi recovers. These next few strikes seem more intense than the swordplay so far. Qui-Gon starts with a combo, a weak low attack, then a heavy attack up high. A valiant effort, and it nearly worked. Obi-Wan is back on his feet, closing the distance while the other two are spinning. Darth Maul gets the upper hand here, knocking Qui-Gon against the wall. Kenobi jumps in, starting with a high swing followed by two low ones. This time, his spin has a practical purpose. It allows him to attack the legs from two sides. Not the best move in the fight, but it's a fairly good idea.
I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
Qui-Gon recovers quickly, only having missed 2 turns. His next attack lines up with Kenobi's third one. Despite the change in scenery, Maul is still on a perfectly flat surface. He disengages from the block and begins to create another opening. First, bringing both ends of the saber to bear against Qui-Gon. Second, he blocks a flanking horizontal swipe from Kenobi. This one comes from behind Maul, but he redirects the blade above his head. Finally, the Sith Lord backs away to a bottomless pit. There are no safety rails, and he even wobbles while standing on the edge. The Jedi have our Sithy friend backed into a corner. That would be excellent progress if Maul hadn't set up the entire scenario. Right now, the fight is a standoff. Everyone is standing slightly out of lightsaber range. Qui-Gon Jinn adopts one of his most iconic poses. Lightsaber held mostly vertical, up at shoulder height beside his face. Possibly not the best stance for deflecting blaster bolts, but better in this context. Young Obi-Wan will be the one to reinitiate combat. Kenobi is clearly preparing to attack, but he doesn't actually swing his lightsaber. It was all just a feint, setting Qui-Gon up for a better chance. Darth Maul doesn't react to this, only moving to block the real attack from Qui-Gon. At last, Maul can put his plan into action. Through the power of the Force, he jumps about 4 meters to a nearby catwalk. The Jedi are left on the inspection platform from earlier. This jump is mostly a test, to show the audience what kind of feats a Jedi can perform. Kenobi and Jinn make the same jump with little effort. We can be confident that Maul has trained for this. He is a weapon, forged for the purpose of killing Jedi Knights. He must have experience fighting on narrow platforms like this. Jedi are not prepared to take this sort of thing in stride. It's highly likely that Maul practiced these jumps while dodging live blaster bolts. On their first move after landing, Maul is able to block both Jedi at the same time. This is where the movie cuts to another perspective. When we return to the fight, there have been yet more acrobatics. We had left the duel on the ground floor, roughly the same height as the street outside. Now everyone is on the next level up, about 10 meters higher. Maul will have jumped up there first, allowing his enemies to flank him. Traditionally, this is thought of as a bad decision. In this case, it doesn't seem nearly as unwise. We've established that Darth Maul can block without being hit even once. At the same time, he can land kicks that knock his opponent to the floor. Being outflanked isn't even a handicap, thanks to a double-bladed lightsaber. Even though Maul is spinning, it's clear his attention is on Qui-Gon. The Master is a more serious threat than the apprentice. Maul uses another high-low combo, which Qui-Gon deflects easily enough. Kenobi is lurking in the background, hoping for a sneaky backstab. This does not go well for him. Both attempts are blocked. Obi-Wan gets kicked in the face for the second time this afternoon. If you were curious why Darth Maul wanted to fight in here, this is it. Using exactly the same kick, Maul buys himself minutes instead of seconds. Obi-Wan rolls back by only a few meters, the same as in the hangar. Unfortunately, the platform is less than 2 meters wide. Our Jedi apprentice falls down below ground level, at least 2 floors. He sails off the edge after being kicked, hits one platform, and then another. I had always thought Obi-Wan fell 1 level. This shot is rather unclear. In a few seconds, we'll find out the real answer to this altitude issue. Unlike with the earlier uses of this kick, Darth Maul failed to create an opening. Qui-Gon was not occupied at the time. Taking a leaf from Maul's book, the Jedi Master doesn't bother using a lightsaber. Jinn uses a shoulder bash to knock Maul off balance, followed by a punch to the head. Apparently that's quite an effective tactic, because the Sith Lord goes over the edge too. Maul seems to have more control of his fall than Kenobi did. Still, landing flat on your back is quite uncomfortable. A mere mortal would be out of action for quite a few seconds. Qui-Gon isn't going to wait that long. He jumps down, the only one to have done so of his own volition. This landing looks effortless. He managed to keep his footing. Better still, Qui-Gon deactivated his saber before jumping. No green blade is visible while he's in flight, where Maul had both blades still on. By the time of the landing, the lightsaber is pointed down towards Maul. Another moment that could have easily ended the duel. As usual, Darth Maul reacts too quickly to be wounded. In this case, he makes 2 actions in the same round of combat. As well as blocking the green saber, Maul uses his signature move. That's right, he kicks Qui-Gon in the head again. This time it barely causes Jinn to stumble. It buys Maul just enough time to stand up and start running. Qui-Gon is fighting alone again, so he presses the attack. A pair of low strikes to opposite sides of the legs. This also causes a 3rd flash of saber contact, though it's hard to say who caused it. Qui-Gon then ducks a swing to come up on the inside, behind Maul's blade. That's one of the more interesting moves so far. The Sith apprentice is backing away now, pushed deeper into the building. Is this another of his plans, like opening the door in the first place? Darth Maul spends a lot of time defending. Qui-Gon goes for a low attack, a high block, and then another swing down low. This would be a much better combo against a single-bladed lightsaber. Even without Obi-Wan involved, the sides seem equally matched. Speaking of the lad, where is young Kenobi? Obi-Wan had fallen and only caught hold by the tips of his fingers. The camera has been pointed elsewhere for quite some time. We don't know exactly how many seconds had passed since everyone went down the level. It's possible he hung there for a while before pulling himself back up. Kenobi's lightsaber had landed on the catwalk, right next to him. That's to be expected. It fell along the same flight path as its master. Aided by the Force, Obi-Wan climbs back to his feet. It doesn't take an expert tracker to follow the sound of a lightsaber duel. On the level above, Qui-Gon blocks a thrust from Maul. All good and well, until he attacks the same blade from the opposite side. I don't see any reason to do this particular move. We're several minutes into a large fight scene, and this is the first objection I have. Perhaps not as flawless as the Tatooine duel. Unlike then, I can't say that every character always makes the best decision. That earlier duel had been about the context, the innocent bystanders. This time, the fight takes place well away from any kids or monarchs. Both sides are evenly matched, unable to cause any lasting damage. Qui-Gon keeps Maul on the back foot. The Jedi Master continues another fluid string of attacks. One swing from each side up high, then a third aimed downward. During this particular shot, we see a doorway in the background. It's quite large and starts to glow a fiery red. These are widely regarded as bad omens, a kind of foreshadowing. In fact, a very similar visual appears in a movie of the same era. The Fellowship of the Ring lingers on its red door. We are shown an entire goblin army fleeing from its glow. All of that is intended to make the Balrog more impressive. Before the monster appears in person, we are told its name and power level.
A Balrog.
Star Wars puts its equivalent door in the background. There is no dread because of the door. Our focus is on the saber duel. Any similarity here is probably a coincidence. The movies were released only 2 years apart. Obi-Wan looks up at the catwalk above him. This is how we can answer the question of altitude. Darth Maul and Qui-Gon are on a long, straight bridge. We've seen one of those leading away from the main door, meaning it's on ground level. When the duel moved into the building, we saw that bridge in the background. Obi-Wan has definitely fallen below ground level. We see Kenobi make a Force-assisted jump, more impressive than previous ones. From a standing start, he leaps an entire level into the air. Very impressive, considering these levels look about 10 meters apart. Force jump was established halfway through the movie, as we left Tatooine. Qui-Gon boarded a ship while it was in flight. There are clearly limits to this power. He couldn't jump into orbit. You won't find a Jedi leaping tall buildings in a single bound. Throughout the fight, we've also seen a moderate amount of acrobatics. Jumping will be relevant to the end of the duel, so it's important we see it often. Once again, the Jedi choose to jump with lightsaber deactivated. As soon as Obi-Wan lands, he turns on the saber and starts running. Qui-Gon uses a familiar pattern of attack, which seems effective. He causes no damage, but Maul is too busy blocking to strike back. One swing up high, then one each to the bottom left and right. Darth Maul manages to parry this, sweeping the green saber to one side. Jyn is barely even slowed down, returning for an overhead chop. Maul blocks with a horizontal saber raised at head height. More interestingly, we can clearly see Maul turn to look behind him. Rather than spinning, I think he was looking at the scenery. At this point, I think Maul is worried. Fighting inside the power station was his idea. These doors, I don't believe anyone truly planned for. Qui-Gon may have been planning to push the Sith Lord back against the force field. By the time Jyn starts the next high attack, Maul is moving to block. This interrupts the combo. Qui-Gon never gets to follow up with the leg strikes. Behind Maul, the red force fields have deactivated. With only one path open to him, Maul retreats through the gap. Qui-Gon is hot on his heels, trying to end the duel before Maul can recover. It seems to be working. A couple of horizontal slashes at waist height have Maul off balance. A few seconds more and the fight may have ended. Darth Maul blocks a spinning low attack with one blade, then attacks high using the other. Another example of an advantage to the double-bladed lightsaber. On the other hand, this is still blocked as easily as ever. Qui-Gon goes for another wide swing to the ankles, which Maul is forced to jump over. The next move will be the last, and Jin makes it a good one. It begins as a horizontal swing, aimed around Maul's right shoulder. This was a feint, because he suddenly switches to attacking on Maul's left. A very good try, something we could have seen more often. Darth Maul diverts the green saber around him, using his second blade. Everyone's favorite Sith apprentice continues to run away, bravely. Here's where it gets complicated. Maul hasn't even finished twirling his saber before the doors go red. At the end of the bridge, there is a corridor lined with pillars. They have a 45-degree range of motion, either facing the opposite pillar or turned away. Whenever they change state, it always happens in sequence. By the time the next pair starts turning, the previous force field is already online. Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn deactivates his lightsaber. Mechanically, this should have no impact on the saber duel. Power consumption isn't an issue for multiple reasons. First of all, they're designed to be used exactly like this. A lightsaber should use a reasonably potent power cell. Batteries are a solved problem at this point in galactic history. Sabers have looked the same for the last 4,000 years or so. You will almost never see a Jedi with a flat battery in his sword. No matter how recklessly you use your lightsaber, it should run continuously for years. The second reason is about when a lightsaber uses power. Even though they often act like it, sabers do not give off heat. You might be able to melt ice and metal with it, but it won't keep your hands warm. There's probably some loss from the light, even if the glow was an atmospheric interaction. Lack of waste heat means lightsabers can idle very efficiently. They are described as a stable loop of energy, only depleting power when they touch an object. All of this means there should be no benefit to turning off a lightsaber. Qui-Gon wasn't worried about conserving his battery life. There's no consequence to this choice at all. It doesn't help in any significant way, and it has no cost either. That makes it all the more revealing when each character chooses to deactivate. Qui-Gon had done so immediately, sensing the fight was paused. Darth Maul tests the barrier, despite knowing it would fail. As soon as he confirms this barrier is impenetrable, Maul turns off both his saber blades. Obi-Wan is the last to follow suit. He clearly wants to intervene, but knows he'll be delayed by the door sequence. At this point, we need to address the red force field barrier. What is a laser door? Why is it red?
And why is it so frequently linked with quasars?
In the movies up to this point, lightsabers have sliced through anything. I can only remember two objects slowing down the blade: Vader's suit and blast doors. These red doors have an advantage in that they don't really exist. There's no solid wall to cut through, just a curtain of energy circulating. The only vulnerabilities would be the wall emitters, which nobody attacks. Not even Darth Maul thinks it would be a good idea to hack such a machine open. This is a perfect example of how to defeat a lightsaber. Instead of trying to come up with a material that can resist the blade, use energy. That way you have two energy fields interacting, constantly recirculating. When Maul's saber touches the barrier, it causes only a brief ripple. That's a good clue that the force field might be related to lightsabers. Given that saber technology is intentionally vague, that isn't much to go on. These can't be lightsaber doors, otherwise Naboo could mass-produce sabers. The novelization mostly talks about lasers, but there is an odd one out. This line describes the barrier as a stream of electrons. If that's correct, these doors aren't lasers at all. Lasers are made of photons. A beam of electrons is called beta radiation. Using a particle beam to create a beta ray door seems, excessive. A laser door seems unlikely as well, so what about a turbo laser door? Blasters lead us in circles because their nature has changed over time. Two of the classic options are just laser and particle beam again. The remaining answer is plasma. That one has potential. We already know Naboo has plasma on it. The Gungans rely on low-cap plants to refine this naturally occurring plasma. Human society also mines plasma from the depths of Naboo. That's what this entire location is, a plasma power station. All the glowing tubes are full of unrefined plasma. According to the book Inside the Worlds, these are called acceleration shafts. Plasma from the underground mines passes through every tube in turn. All of this is conveniently placed next to Theed Palace. The power station is mostly used to power the royal hangar and palace. There are no planetary defense cannons, no shield to use up the surplus power. Naboo uses some fraction of this to power their city, and the surplus is exported off-world. If this entire environment seems familiar, that's because we've seen something very much like it. Cloud City has a similar purpose, mining Tabana gas from the planet Bespin. We can also draw a lot of similarities to the Death Star. This book notes that Senator Palpatine had been very interested in the idea of deep pits. After the plasma runs through these shafts, the real processing begins. Machinery we never see activates the plasma, as well as purifying it. It would seem activating makes the plasma stable. It's possible the red doors use that same plasma. We also need to explain why the laser doors move in that pattern. According to the novelization, these are a security feature. As Maul and Qui-Gon go through the corridor, anti-intrusion lasers come on. That seems completely implausible. After only a few seconds, the lasers deactivate and let people walk through. Inside the Worlds says they are a safety feature related to power surges. That idea does a far better job of explaining how the doors move. The timing is intermittent because these surges are unpredictable, all just part of running a plasma power generator.
Yep, just the two of us. And one fully automated atomic station.
Whatever triggers them, we can't see any change in the air or plasma flow. That implies there's no wind. The lasers aren't to keep out any air pressure. Perhaps the doors are on a hair trigger and it's usually a false alarm.
I'm going to find whoever did this.
To explain the pattern, all I can think of is power consumption. If you stagger the activation, there's a consistent number of pillars turning at any given time. One force field is becoming stable just as the next is starting to glow. It creates a more gradual change in power usage. As for the nature of these red barriers, I found the perfect reference. There are many devices in the galaxy that can be used as weapons. A classic example would be the stick and all its countless variations. Knobbly stick, pointed stick, metal point on a stick, or a pointed metal stick, flanged metal stick, stick launcher, explosive stick. When you're in a nest of Gundarks, that fancy hydrospanner is just a metal stick. What you really need is an Evasive 13 IFD system. None of the Jedi could possibly own an Evasive 13, but there were other models on the market. Individual field disruptors are small machines worn on your clothing. After activating your IFD, it creates a disruption bubble around you. An unintended side effect is that it'll deliver an energy blast to anyone who touches you. Depending how high you've set the IFD intensity, it could be fatal. We're not looking to misuse these devices though. We want them for their intended purpose, bypassing security fields. Individual field disruptors allow the wearer to walk through energy screens and fences. This device existed in the pre-prequel expanded universe in 1997. The energy fences are described as exactly what Episode 1 shows. Energy fences are walls of visible, deadly energy. Other terms include energy screens or power screens. They're a common security device, both military or civilian. As far as I know, the original trilogy never shows one of these fences. That's another example where the prequel movies match the existing lore. During the prequel era, the Star Wars website divided the databank into multiple tabs. There was one for the movies and one for the expanded universe. The third tab covered details from behind the scenes. These aren't different continuities like on Wikipedia. The EU simply provides more information. It goes deeper into the same universe. I've heard of people getting upset when they find out how much we know about Star Wars. Keeping the EU lore in its own tab might help to protect these people from such details. Potentially, a field disruptor might also affect deflector shields. I've heard it said that the energy fences are ray shields. That's a strange conclusion to draw, but I can see the logic behind it. Ray shields are mentioned in the original movie. The most obvious reply is to point out that ray shields are invisible. Otherwise, we'd have seen a shield around the Death Star's thermal exhaust port. That could be explained as an effect of the atmosphere, like the Gungan and Droideka shields. Another problem is that ray shields block energy weapons. Physical objects, like a torpedo or battle droid, can pass through ray shields. This leads me to Episode 3, where ray shields are used to trap a pair of Jedi. I regard this as a mistake, but there is some basis for it. Ray shields are said to have a similar effect to the IFD. Touching an active ray shield would zap you with enough energy that it may be fatal. That explains why Maul only hits it with a lightsaber, not his hand. However, energy fences have the same feature, a blast upon touching it. The difference is that energy fences are built for this purpose. Ray shields are made to deflect blaster bolts. A power screen is made to slap you with something like a heavy repeating blaster bolt. Ray shields are not designed to stand up to melee combat. Energy fences are security devices, so they'll be tamper-proof. Now that we know, let's see how an individual field disruptor works. When you activate your IFD, it creates a bubble around you. All you need to worry about are two things: intensity setting and battery capacity. Different strengths of energy fence require you to crank up the power. Civilian fences are much weaker than military or industrial ones. Assuming you have a high-quality IFD, you can walk through most power screens. If the energy fence has a higher rating, it overwhelms the IFD. You take the full force of the fence's blast. Power consumption is also a factor. The evasive 13 runs for either an hour or 4 minutes. You might be able to circumvent this limitation by carrying a backpack generator. Individual field disruptors have shown us what these energy screens are. However, I don't think the Jedi should have carried IFDs. Darth Maul probably has one aboard ship, but he rarely uses it. Naboo's red doors look like they'd be extremely powerful. No matter what model of IFD you bring, I doubt it would have helped. Now that we have context for the red barriers, let's get back to the duelists. Qui-Gon has already shut down his lightsaber, and now he kneels. Just like on Tatooine, fighting a Sith Lord was exhausting. Jedi Master Jin has a great deal of wisdom and experience on his side. That is a great advantage, to be sure, but the knight is getting old. Both apprentices bring youth to the fight, with all that entails. Qui-Gon had been trying to win the fight quickly. He's a lot more tired than the other two, and that will only get worse. Obi-Wan is the last to power down his lightsaber. Since he had nothing better to do while sprinting, he will have noticed the door pattern. His fence will stay active for a second or two longer than Maul's one. Kenobi is ready to move at a moment's notice, and he will definitely get several moments. Darth Maul is visibly impatient, pacing back and forth in his cage. This is exactly the scenario Qui-Gon wanted to avoid. After a moment to recover, all the momentum of the fight has been lost. Maul has already recovered. He's not on the back foot and has time to think. Qui-Gon was pushing himself to achieve such good results without help. Trying to recover some of his strength, he goes into a state of Jedi meditation. That can only be beneficial, especially since Maul isn't doing the same thing. On the other hand, it signals that Qui-Gon needs this rest. Darth Maul can clearly see the implication of weakness. Next, we see another ability. This one has been in constant use throughout the fight, and the movie in general. Obi-Wan ignites his lightsaber again, a second or two before the cue that would have prompted him to. This shows the same power that was explained on Tatooine: Jedi reflexes.
He can see things before they happen. That's why he appears to have such quick reflexes.
All three Force users are able to sense when the doors will move again. That's why Qui-Gon considered it safe to meditate with his sword shut down. Both the red and green sabers were ready long before the blades crossed. The duel continues much as it had before. Qui-Gon opens with one high attack and one to each leg. Maul is pushed backwards along the corridor, spinning his saber. This cycle happens twice over the course of the door opening sequence. Maul and Qui-Gon make their way into a cul-de-sac room with a bottomless pit in the middle. This time, Qui-Gon makes 2 high attacks followed by a low one. At this moment, everything seems to be going fine. Our Jedi Knight is winning the fight on his own, and Kenobi is on the way. We should never underestimate Qui-Gon's skill as a Jedi. If Darth Maul was planning something, it involved surviving the fight. Qui-Gon immediately forced Maul to retreat, using only his skill with a sword. The Sith Lord may have chosen which direction to run, but he couldn't hold his ground. Everyone in this duel fought as well as could be expected. Alas, Obi-Wan will not be fighting just yet. There is another power surge, causing the energy fences to snap closed. Kenobi will have sensed this, possibly as soon as he started running. Even with that much warning, he barely manages to stop before hitting the barrier. Clearly, young Ben was pushing his luck. This is the pivotal moment of the Fateful Duel. Maul is no longer retreating, he gains ground again. He attacks low with one blade, high with the other, and keeps pushing forward. Qui-Gon blocks these as easily as ever, though his sword is swept aside at one point. This is a worst-case scenario. If Maul gets the upper hand, he could easily win. Qui-Gon blocks an odd move, more of a side-on thrust than a swing. To his credit, the Jedi actually succeeds at halting Maul's advance. Jin swings down at Maul's leg, forcing the Sith back a step. That situation only lasts for a moment. Maul spins his saber staff to disengage, then continues advancing. He attacks with each blade in turn, alternating between high and low strikes. Qui-Gon makes another clever attempt to turn the fight around. He takes a hand off his lightsaber while moving the blade to his right, but it's back on in the next camera angle. Qui-Gon then whirls the blade above his head, going to his left before coming down on the right again. That sort of wind-up makes more sense if your sword has weight to it. I can only conclude that this is a feint, a misdirection. It very nearly worked. Maul blocks in a strange way, saber held behind his body. However, an awkward parry is still a parry. Once again, Maul spins his double-bladed saber to disengage and reset the fight. Qui-Gon is forced to back off once again. He has retreated 180 degrees around the room, despite starting with a 90-degree advantage. The Sith apprentice attacks high with his right blade, high with the left. Then as part of the same movement, low with the right and low with the left. So far, nobody has managed to land a significant blow. The novelization does mention Maul binding his wounds while Qui-Gon meditates. Minor burns and slashes, none of which we see in the movie. I do prefer there to have been some kind of injury. As depicted in the movie, boots are a better weapon than lightsabers. This pattern holds true at the end of Qui-Gon's duel. A blunt object is what really makes the difference. Qui-Gon makes his final move, an overhead vertical chop. The Sith Lord blocks this with his blade held horizontal. He then slams the hilt of his lightsaber into Qui-Gon's face. The duel is already over. While the Jedi Master is off balance, Darth Maul impales him with a red blade. Notice how small an opportunity it took for a single saber attack to land. This could have happened to anyone at any stage of the duel. If Qui-Gon hadn't been as skilled, he would have died on Tatooine. Maul was well trained in the Jedi arts, allowing him to challenge 2 at once. Obi-Wan was indeed ready to become a knight, since he wasn't an easy target. Eliminating one of your opponents would be the optimal move. Throughout the fight, Darth Maul never had time to stab Kenobi. Having Qui-Gon isolated and exhausted was a critical part of this victory. Using an unusual lightsaber design will also have helped. Finally, we should consider the dark side of the Force. Even if the dark side is no stronger, quick and easy are relevant. Sith training will likely give you power much earlier on. There will be a higher emphasis on combat, both with a saber and other equipment. Sith are not renowned for their compassion, so they have more brutal methods of teaching. Darth Maul is a more impressive warrior than a comparable Jedi would have been. As soon as he stabs Qui-Gon, the greatest threat is eliminated. Maul moves on, waiting for the energy fence to cycle again. There's only one Padawan left to mop up. Maul stalks over to gloat, which is potentially unwise. The only possible disadvantage to killing a Jedi would be the morale question. On one hand, yes, that would make Kenobi sad. The other likely outcome is that you'll make the surviving Jedi angry. That's helpful if you want to corrupt him, turning him to the dark side. Darth Maul has no intention of recruiting Obi-Wan, so this is a little risky. I think it's fair to say that the Jedi apprentice will have been channeling the dark side. He didn't mean to, he isn't aware of it until later. Kenobi is trying to follow his Jedi training, but he wants to win above all. As before, we find the lightsabers have been turned off. As long as the fight is interrupted by energy barriers, this seems to be normal. Once again, Force users can sense the doors a couple of seconds before they start to move. Obi-Wan is the first to activate his saber, though Maul isn't far behind. Driven by fury and a hunger for vengeance, Kenobi charges forward. Darth Maul is pushed back around the room about 45 degrees. Kenobi opens with the same flurry his master used most often. One attack up high, then a low one on each side. This works as well as ever, but then Kenobi's luck runs out. Maul stops retreating to counterattack. He tries to alternate using each end of the double-bladed saber. Obi-Wan had seen that pattern a minute ago, so he doesn't let it play out. The first swing is blocked as normal, but Kenobi ducks under the second. The lightsaber passes over his head, putting him inside with Maul's back turned. There isn't time to exploit this. Maul is still halfway through his pattern. Obi-Wan blocks the return swing by holding a blade behind his back. I'm not sure that's a practical move in reality, but for a Jedi it's reasonable. The main benefit is when he brings the sword back in front. That catches the final part of Maul's pattern, which should put the Sith off balance. Obi-Wan comes in with a high attack on his right, then one low on the left. Before he can turn it into a classic 3-hit combo, Maul retaliates. Obi-Wan is forced to block top left, top right, and bottom left. Instead of waiting for the fourth strike, our Jedi hero dodges again. Just as before, this gets him in behind Maul's back. Despite being in position for a backstab, there is no time. Obi-Wan blocks to the top left, bottom right, and bottom left. This approach isn't working. Both men back off out of melee range. Darth Maul spins his saber staff, then closes in while spinning himself. Now Obi-Wan takes a slightly different approach to dodging. He blocks to the top right, bottom left, then jumps over a low attack. Maul takes one final swing before he starts losing ground again. The next few moments are hard to classify into offense and defense. There aren't any clear attacks or parries. These all look like crippling strikes, only stopped by an opposite attack. What we can say is that the Sith Lord was pushed backwards. A fully trained Jedi apprentice was able to match Maul's skill in combat. As the camera goes into a close-up, Kenobi is definitely blocking. First, with the blue blade point down behind his head. We've seen this pattern before. It continues with a block to the front. Obi-Wan knocks away Maul's saber, and deflects as the other end comes in. After an overhead parry, the blue blade is lowered. When it comes back up, the double-bladed lightsaber is cleft in twain. For a moment, we can see both halves with their blades active. It's likely the cut was uneven, so the components on one end will have been damaged. This is only possible because of the way Darth Maul's lightsaber was constructed. He used the simplest possible approach to a double-bladed saber. Get 2 sets of parts and install them inside a double-length hilt. Not very elegant, but it does give you a longer grip section. The earlier model of double-bladed lightsaber belonged to Exar Kun. The length is only slightly longer than normal, due to a more sophisticated design. Instead of doubling all the components, Exar Kun just has 2 blade emitters. Inside is a single power cell, along with 1 set of crystals. In the unlikely event that your lightsaber hilt is damaged, Maul has the better design. It really is just 2 lightsabers attached end to end. Both halves are independent of each other. One can continue working if the other breaks. Obi-Wan continues by using his most effective weapon, the power of foot. A swift kick to the sternum knocks Darth Maul flat on his back. Without a double-bladed lightsaber, this becomes quite an ordinary duel. Kenobi flips over Maul to land behind him, batting away a feeble defensive swing. An unnecessary flourish prevents the Jedi from getting another hit. Maul jumps to his feet just as Obi-Wan lands, and he runs while the saber is in mid-twirl. Kenobi makes a futile slash at Maul's heels. At this point, the Lord of the Sith has retreated 90 degrees, twice in a row. He covers his escape with a very practical flourish of the wrist. After sweeping his sword through the rear arc, it swings back the other way. Obi-Wan catches up as they return to the doorway. He opens with a diagonal attack against Maul's left side. Because of the change to his weapon, Maul fights with a different moveset. His block turns into a series of strikes, 2 high and 1 low on the same side. These are mostly to distract from the real attack, a boot to the head. To his credit, Obi-Wan doesn't so much as stumble. He turns this into a backflip, dodging a horizontal follow-up strike. Darth Maul is clearly trying to replicate his previous stab. After landing, Kenobi barely manages to deflect it in time. Maul takes this as his cue to whirl away, backing off by a few meters. As he comes back in, still spinning, his first attack is from out of range. Obi-Wan blocks it anyway, a low diagonal swing from his left. The Jedi holds his ground, blocking a high horizontal slash from the same side. When Kenobi tries a pair of ankle strikes, Darth Maul dodges around him. Now the Sith has his back to the energy fence, right where Qui-Gon wanted him. Unfortunately, that means behind Obi-Wan is a large hole in the ground. Poor Obi-Wan has no idea what he's being set up for. He tries going for Maul's head, but the Sith ducks underneath. Quite a taunty dodge, I might add.
I go straight up to my haters and dab.
Since the blue blade hit nothing but air, Kenobi tries a vertical chop. The duelists lock blades for a moment. It makes for a nice contrast, 2 apprentices of light and dark. A moment later, Obi-Wan is pushed backwards. I tend to think this might have been a sneaky kick, because it didn't look like a shove. As he stumbles back to an arm's length, Maul uses the Force Push ability. The remaining Jedi tumbles back over the edge, into the melting pit. His lightsaber flies out of his hand along the way, turning off automatically. For the second time this fight, Obi-Wan is left dangling by his fingertips. As before, this shaft might as well be bottomless. If you fall down here, there can be no recovery. It is a final death. Darth Maul approaches the edge of the pit, noting the fallen lightsaber. This may not be Obi-Wan's first ever lightsaber, but it's the one he carried on Naboo. The design is familiar if you know what you're looking for. Lightsaber hilts have always been a key part of Star Wars. At first, Luke starts out with an inherited saber hilt. The Graflex design, looking suspiciously like a camera part, belonged to Anakin. Both Luke and Vader used a similar design, and for the same reason, because that's what Anakin used when he was a Jedi. In Episode 5, Luke loses that saber and also his hand. From that point on, Luke had to build a lightsaber of his own.
I see you have constructed a new lightsaber.
However, the new saber wasn't a perfect copy of his father's. Luke took inspiration from his own mentor, Ben Kenobi. It is a well-known fact that Luke's green saber is a copy of Obi-Wan's.
A Jedi's weapon. Much like your father's.
That detail was carried over into the prequel era and its various saber hilts. Kenobi's saber in Episode 1 is an extrapolation. Instead of being dull, all the metal surfaces are polished. The blade emitter keeps a small flare, but lacks the narrow sections near the tip. The ribbed grip looks as much like rubber or plastic as metal. In the original trilogy, hilts had a rectangular box for an activation lever. Prequel versions tend to use a red button as the activation switch. Finally, the lumps around the base have been extended. There are 6 spaced around the hilt, which should stop the saber from rolling. Unless there's a Sith warrior kicking it. Darth Maul obviously knows something about the Jedi, how important a saber is. Destroying Obi-Wan's hilt is more about being cruel than practical. Obviously, Maul considers his victory to be complete. He will also assume the Trade Federation is winning the battle outside. The novelization says that Obi-Wan had given in to the dark side, that a Sith Lord started throwing objects, and the Jedi responded in kind.
A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. Nothing more will I teach you today.
While I don't think Kenobi was trying to, he will have tapped into the dark side. None of that helped. Darth Maul is just too good at dark side lightsaber combat. You can't expect to beat a Sith at his own game. Obi-Wan hadn't been calm or at peace, so he wasn't in touch with the light side.
But how am I to know the good side from the bad?
When you are calm, at peace, passive.
Now he's hanging from a warning light, counting down his last seconds. This is where Kenobi stops thinking like a Sith apprentice and becomes a Jedi. His own lightsaber was just destroyed. Maul's lightsaber was cut in half, and he's still holding the better part. That leaves just one weapon in the room. Future General Kenobi has a plan. He stops looking like a cornered rodent, and Darth Maul notices. All the threats in the room have been eliminated, or so he thought. The only lightsaber belonged to Qui-Gon, and what a fantastic sword it is. Of all the hilt designs in the galaxy, Jyn has to be my favorite. This isn't an ostentatious, gaudy hilt with electrum trim. The shape is just a cylinder with a few nice details. Where other sabers are covered in knobs and switches, Qui-Gon has one button. There's a protrusion opposite, said to be the charging port. This was likely used as a belt clip for props during filming. If you look carefully at the silver part, that diagonal is reminiscent of Anakin's saber. The overall shape is also similar to Obi-Wan's hilt from the original movies. Finally, the grip. Instead of being superficial grooves, those cuts on Qui-Gon's hilt go all the way through. That leaves air where part of the battery would normally go. Lore explains this by saying there are a dozen power microcells. That's the sort of detail only the rightful owner would appreciate. Obi-Wan, being a fully trained apprentice, can put a plan together. Ever since Episode 5, we've known it was possible to pull a lightsaber to your hand.
Obi-Wan is taught well.
Another ability was the Force Jump, established in Cloud City. Young Kenobi knows about all these powers, he fully understands them. When he looks over toward Qui-Gon's sword, he isn't seeing with his eyes. The end of this fight uses abilities we know about, ones that were foreshadowed. When Obi-Wan jumps 5 meters straight up, we aren't surprised. The borrowed lightsaber flies straight into his hand. Obi-Wan jumps all the way over Maul, catching him by surprise. If the Sith apprentice had expected the fight to continue, he definitely would have blocked. Due to his overconfidence, that is the last mistake Darth Maul ever made. His story ends here with an expression of mild confusion. He was a great villain and will be missed. It's almost a shame how short his life was, a waste of a cool design. It might have been fun to see some continued adventures of Darth Maul. Still, there is no room for argument. The movie was very clear about this. Maul was sliced in half. He comes apart on the way down, into the torso and legs. The parts that used to be Maul spend a while plummeting down the shaft at terminal velocity. As for what's waiting at the bottom, it's hard to say. Some sources describe this as the core shaft of the power station. It's clearly a reference to the reactor shaft where Palpatine died, but that's not all. The most common term for this shaft is melting pit. Darth Maul's remains are in for a warm welcome. That name was extremely confusing for me. You can't just say melting pit and expect a Star Wars fan to overlook that. That term is specifically a reference to Darth Vader. For as long as I have known Vader's name, I also knew his origin. Everyone knows that Darth Vader was created after a fight around a melting pit. When I looked up that knowledge, I have also seen the term molten pit. This was my first thought upon seeing Maul's melting pit. You can't do that. That is the origin for Vader. You can't just use it on Maul first. You have to realize, this was before Episode 3 was made. There was no Mustafar. We always expected the fight to take place in a Terminator 2 steel mill. When you know what to look for, that sounds a lot like the Naboo plasma generator. Still, Vader's pit must be shallow enough for him to survive. It isn't credible that a Sith cyborg could be salvaged from this place. Obi-Wan is victorious, and he waits long enough to be sure. As soon as we know Maul is gone for good, Kenobi steps back. He turns off the borrowed lightsaber, setting it down gently beside its master. Qui-Gon is still conscious. He could hear the entire fight. In a lot of ways, this moment is similar to Obi-Wan's own death. Here, Kenobi plays the role of Luke, unable to help, his mentor killed behind a barrier. After the fight is over, the scene is closer to Yoda's final moments.
Promise me you will train the boy.
Qui-Gon Jinn's final words were carefully chosen. He knows how the Naboo situation will play out. As for the Sith, Kenobi is the most experienced Jedi in the galaxy. There is only one issue Qui-Gon wants to influence. One kid with potential who might otherwise be forgotten.
He will bring balance. Train him.
The audience knows how important Anakin Skywalker will be. At this point, none of the characters can see it. Qui-Gon believed he was an important opportunity for the Jedi. Obi-Wan doesn't see the same thing, but trusts Qui-Gon's judgment. Yoda will go along with the idea, if only to avoid Kenobi leaving the temple. If Jinn had survived long enough to train Anakin, galactic history might look very different. That concludes this episode of The Bread Circus. Before moving on to the next movie, we intend to compile the series into a single video. The definitive edition with some extra material added.
Now, for its 20th anniversary.
We aren't exactly sure how long this process may take. Please join us on Discord, Patreon, or see our YouTube community page for updates during this process. The vile Nemoidians have blockaded our channel, it would seem.
I don't want this stunted slime in my sight again.
Help ensure the Bread Circus is still in town next year. Brandon Smith is clearly using a pseudonym. Das Lol Tractor has a Lamborghini tractor he wants us to know about. Imperator Vex, the based with 2 S's librarian. John Back, a Corolla pilot, and a good friend. Kamikaze Velociraptor, the worst kind of lizard. Might also be a girl. Conk, the only thing worse than a Discord moderator. An Australian. Krillic, not a Krillic, but the Krillic. Losba Evoli couldn't be bribed to draw Absol, whatever that is. Lieutenant Dan's legs. The only thing worse than a Star Wars nerd is an aviation nerd. The little Annie of Combined Arms Warfare. Mountain Eagle, our second favorite Norwegian. And Zafrax, who gave us a whole bunch of money and then disappeared.
What, you think you're some kind of Jedi waving your hand around like that? I'm a Toydarian. Mind tricks don't work on me. Only money. No money, no parts, no deal.